About 6 years ago, I told you a parable of a tower and a scaffold. Manchester Cathedral in England is a church that was founded in 1421. One of the first parts of the building was a tower almost 100 feet high. It's the most iconic part, the part everyone comes to see. And like many cathedrals in England, this particular church took about 450 years to build. It's not like America. But the tower started to age and grow vegetation in the cracks between the sandstone. And so the founders, or the committee in the church, knew that something had to be done. And so they raised almost $1 million in American funds. And then they surrounded the tower with scaffolding so they could get close to it and they could take off the moss and clean the vegetation and replace the sandstone that was coming apart. But when the more than 1 million tourists that visit this church every year came to see the tower, all they could see was the scaffolding. We came to see the tower, they said. All that's there is the scaffolds. Let he who has ears to hear what the Spirit says to the church. It is human nature to take something God has done that is miraculous, historic, inspiring, majestic, and wildly attractive to the world, and then to build up stuff around that thing that God has done in order to protect it, in order to honor it, to promote it, to sustain it. And so we surround it with structures and rules and rituals that are designed, we hope, to embody the passion of this once-in-a-lifetime thing that God has done. But somewhere in the night, it's never in public, and through 1,000 little actions, it's never just one thing. The attention gradually shifts from the tower to the scaffolds. The focus goes from how do we honor the tower to how do we protect the tower. And when we do that, things begin to change. Then, by the grace of God, there comes someone into the community from the outside. Someone that doesn't belong to us. Someone that isn't trying to game the system. They're doing everything they can to get free from the stuff that troubles them. And they truly want the thing we're trying to protect. But all they can see is the scaffolds. And so they end up breaking some of those rules, and they ignore some of those rituals that we built in order to protect this thing. Not defiantly, not recklessly, out of pure need. And then we find ourselves caught between two opposing forces. One is the desire to hold the traditions, to steward the faith once delivered for all the saints. We want to preserve the fire and the heat and the passion so that when we go to hand this faith to someone else, there is something there. And yet, the other force is the person coming to us who doesn't know anything of the systems, the protocol, the rituals, the rules. Touch not, taste not, handle not. The rituals. Hoc est corpus meum. This is my body. They don't get any of that. They just want to be free from the thing that troubles them. Now, I tell that story, I take that much time to frame the story because I think that's exactly what is happening in John chapter 5. This is not just a story about a paralytic getting healed. There's more happening here. And if you can detox from your aversion to religious leaders, I mean, how much you hate religious people. If you can detox from that animus, you can appreciate the tension that they're in. I framed the story like that because I think many people, including me, have missed the sincerity of the religious leaders who are trying to protect the thing that God gave them to steward. I don't believe this is about envy. I don't believe it's jealousy because Jesus is more popular than them. There is not a shred of evidence in the Gospels to indicate this. It's true that they persecute Jesus, and it's true they want to kill Jesus, but all that happens after this moment, not before, at least in the Gospel of John. I think what's happening is Jesus is threatening to destroy the very thing they feel called to protect. And that's why they oppose him. It's not personal. They just want to kill him. And I think this is a parable for us in our day. For some of you, Christian parents who are caught between two opposing forces. How do I honor the faith that I have and want for my kids, and yet at the same time give those kids freedom and agency so they can decide on their own? What rules do I let go of, and what ones just seem too critical to the life of those kids? It's a parable for those of you in leadership right now. How do I uphold the standards of excellence, high ambition in this thing God has called me to do, and at the same time enter into the drama, the scuttlebutt that's happening all the time in the halls and in the offices? To church members, how do we preserve the integrity of the gospel, hope, holiness, and yet remain open to people that know nothing about the gospel? You see that? Is it just me, or are you starting to feel the tension? Oh, you're quiet today. Dog. You see it? Let me tell the story quickly. I mean quickly. And I'll give you information that is not evident on the surface of the story. When you hear the information, it'll make more sense to you. But what I want to get to is I want to talk specifically to two characters in the story that are also in this room. Two characters in the story that resonate with a lot of people in this room. One are the religious leaders, and the other is the paralytic, just trying to get whole. First, the story. I can tell it in 7 sentences. There was a man who was invalid for 38 years. Do you want to be well? Get up. Take your mat and walk. Now, the day on which this occurred was the Sabbath. Who is this fella who told you to take your mat and walk? So the leaders began to persecute Jesus because he did these things on the Sabbath. My Father is always working on the Sabbath. And I am working too. That's pure text. There is in Jerusalem the remains of a pool. You can see it to this day. There's no water, but it's there. Had 5 porticos. There's enough room around the margin of this pool for about 100 people to sit. The story says that it was at a pool like this, some believe it was this very pool, that people who were lame, blind, crippled, or otherwise diseased would sit by the hour every day in hope for magic. This particular man the word means dry and withered, but it's a broad term. It can be used to describe anything from crippled to poor, but whatever it is, he is unable to do for himself what he badly wants done. He sits by the pool for 38 years. Now, think about that for a minute. Your kids are not 38, it's their whole life. He sits by the pool waiting for something good to happen. Then suddenly this man appears and says, "Do you want to be well?" And the word he uses for well doesn't mean cured, it means whole. There's 2 words that he could have used, therapeuo and hugies. And therapeuo means to get over the thing that ails you, to recover from the sickness, to break the fever. But the word he uses is hugies, which means to be whole, to be restored. So there's this passage, for instance, in Matthew chapter 12, where a man has a shriveled, dry, and withered hand, and Jesus walks up to him and he touches the man's hand. And when he touches the man's hand, the word that is used to describe the miracle is this second word. It says his hand was restored, so it was like the other one. Do you see what he's saying? To be restored is to go back to your original condition, to have what was wrong with you completely removed so you are like you were in the beginning. That's the word that Jesus uses. And the man says, if I didn't want to be well, why would I still be sitting here? Every time the angel stirs the waters, I try to get to the waters, and someone else gets there first. And this just reminds me of a lot of people in this room. Man, there is a lot of people in this room who say, I come to this service week after week, like a man sitting by the pool, and I pray like I'm supposed to. I listen to that preacher. I do everything they tell me from the platform, but it's always someone else who gets the miracle. It's always somebody else's kids. Somebody else's prayers. Somebody else gets healed. It's never me. What am I doing wrong? What did I do to jinx this? Jesus says, get up. Take your mat. Walk. The guy, he hadn't walked for 38 years. He stumbles to his feet. And for the first time, he starts using his feet. And he rolls up his mat, which has been his living for 38 years. And he starts carrying it off. The only problem was that this happened on the Sabbath. And there were religious leaders who were watching this. And they were not opposed to the miracle. They were opposed to the mat. It turns out the religious leaders took very seriously the fourth commandment: honor the Sabbath and keep it holy. For 6 days you shall work, but on the Sabbath you shall do no work. And then the arguments began, like they always began with religious people. We do this all the time. What's work? So they designed 39 categories, not behaviors, categories of behaviors to define what was work and what wasn't. And it turns out the 39th category had to do with carrying too much weight. And the mat exceeded the weight limit. You can't make this stuff up. Now these people are looking at a guy that has never walked for 38 years, and he's starting to get his stride. And you got religious people saying, right miracle, wrong day. This is incredible. And this is why you hate them so much, because you grew up with them. They were running the church when you were a kid. And if I had more time, I'd prove it to you. A good number of us are them. Called by God to protect the very thing we want to preserve for the kids. And it's something that our kids want too. But we've surrounded it with scaffolding. They can't get to it. So they say to the man, why are you carrying your mat on the Sabbath? And man says, because the guy who helped me walk said, take your mat and walk. Anybody can make me walk. I'm going to do what he says. And they said, who was he? And he doesn't know. So a few days later, he's in the temple. Jesus runs up to him and says, how are the legs? Guy goes, dadgum, man, this is amazing. He says, well, don't sin or something worse. You never know. That's a good holiness sermon. We won't go there. So then when the guy goes back to the leaders, they say, well, who was it? And he says, it was Jesus of Nazareth. And so they begin to prosecute Jesus of Nazareth for breaking the rules. And just so we're clear about this was not in the law. This was not in your Bible. It was in your interpretation of your Bible. That is the problem. They had 39 categories designed around 2 verses, one in Jeremiah and one in Nehemiah, but those are the only legs these categories have. But we religious people are famous for this, surrounding the thing that everybody wants with rules. And then we tell ourselves, as long as we keep those rules, we've protected the tower. And that's as good as honoring it. The backstory is this. The people of God were given the Sabbath, not in creation. That's when God rested. Read it again. They were given the Sabbath during the Exodus. It's true that God rested on the 7th day, but he never told you to until we get into Exodus. And the timing is very conspicuous because it was right after Israel was delivered from the brickyard, making bricks without straw, serving a man, a system who had no regard for them. God miraculously delivered them, sent them into the wilderness toward a festival. Remember the story? I will take my people from a brickyard so they can have a festival to me in the desert. So all of Exodus is this movement from a brickyard, from bondage, from scarcity, from fear, toward a festival where everybody has enough and there is rest, there is margin, there is a sense where you are good enough. And God says, as a down payment, I give you a Sabbath. Along the way, every 7 days, you will Sabbath. You will rest. You will celebrate. You will eat. You will have enough. And it will remind you of the day you were delivered, and it will remind you of your destiny when everything is whole. Are you still tracking? So this is why Jesus heals on the Sabbath. It wasn't to tick the Pharisees off, though I love that part. He did it because that's what the Sabbath means. Now you've got this beautiful thing that God has given you, and you surround it with death. How are you doing? Now I want to have a word with each of you, because I think some of us in the room are like the religious leaders. We're trying to protect something that we want somebody else to have. And you say, there's a lot wrong, man. We're compromising every day. We've got to draw lines, man. Can I have a word with you? Because I am one of you. The word is this: your heart is good. But I worry sometimes that you are fueled more by fear than by vision. And we must remember that God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. So we must lead out of love, not fear. We must never trade what is good and what is wise for what is right. Right is a matter of morality. Good is a matter of wisdom. People are not attracted to our morality. They're attracted to a good and beautiful life. So we must spend more time, church, defining Sabbath and less time protecting it. For our calling is not to protect the Sabbath, it is to give Sabbath to the world because they want it. Well, then what's going to... I want to remind you that my Father is always working. So you don't have to so much. It doesn't depend on you. It never did. The miracle of the church is that it's been here 2,000 years. So you must never trade relationships for policies. You can have policies, but remember, policies are what you write when you don't know people. But when you actually know them and you know the situation, things get more complicated quickly. So you must hold on to your policies. Even while you keep them, hold them loosely, for you are called to people, not institutions. Keep majoring on the majors. There's one more thing. I know you're ready for me to back off. These people, these kids of yours, these grandkids of yours, these members you worried about, these students, these employees. Listen to me, church. Pray for them. Don't just talk to them about God. Talk to God about them. Get in a room and channel their needs and their dreams and their sins and their limitations. Channel them. I had a long conversation just this week with the father about one. It went like 45 minutes, and it never ends with a happy, so in Jesus' name. It just sort of goes on. You just sort of, well, I don't know, I guess we're stuck here, aren't we, Lord? And the conversation's over. You have to be used to conversations like that if you want to intervene. You just got to get used to it. And then one day, one of those prayers will move the muscle of omnipotence. All right, I'll move on to those of you who sit by the pool. I don't know how long I sat by the pool. I was a church kid. All I saw were the rules. All I wanted was Sabbath. And they kept telling me, this is the Sabbath. I thought, feels like work to me. There's a couple of things. Some of you are deconstructing your faith, and I get it. But while you're deconstructing your faith, I hope you will remember that what you're deconstructing is the faith you grew up with, not necessarily all faith. So remember in your deconstruction, you have nothing to do with religious leaders. You have only to do with Jesus. That is the one standing in front of you right now. It is not religious. Let them do their own thing, run their show. You have a conversation with Jesus. And remember that holiness is not separation from religious leaders. Holiness is union with Jesus. Let the religions take care of themselves. Are you okay? So now there is one maybe this morning who stands in front of some of you like he did me one day and said, do you want to be well? And all you have after 38 years is a limited vision of what well looks like. And now he is promising you a life that is way more than anything you've ever dreamed of. And you've wanted this life a long time. There isn't anything you want more, and that is just the trouble. The fact that he's standing here offering it to you, you want it so bad that you fear leaning in and being disappointed again. And so what you do is you pull back when you should be leaning in because you're afraid, if I just say yes, I'm going to try to walk. I'm going to do what he tells me to do. You're afraid it won't work because it hasn't worked for 38 years. And so your skepticism is the insurance you take out against disappointment. And sometimes when you're in a really bad mood, that disappointment turns to scorn. You start to belittle the faith that those old people and those religious leaders have, and you just totally deconstruct without ever having any alternative. You know, at the end of the day, it seems both of them have the same problem. The religious leaders and the paralytic, and that problem is fear. And I think fear is in this room rampant this morning. There are some of you that are afraid we are losing the faith. You say, Steve, can you name one thing that the world has accepted that the church has not also accepted today? And the truth is, I can't. So you say, see, we're just giving the church away, hand over. It's fear that's motivating you. I need to remind you, the Father is always working. You can trust him. And then there's the paralytic. You say, I've been to your services, I've done everything you said, and so far I get nothing. And I'm afraid if I do this again, the same thing's good. I can't do another disappointment. Man, I'm afraid for you. I am. I've had this conversation with God. Please don't disappoint them. These people are a hair's breadth away from quitting everything. And then I hear him say, Steve, the Father is always working. You can trust me. So that's my word for you this morning. You can trust him. For these religious leaders, it's control. For those by the pool, it's disappointment. Would you bow your heads? Father, there's a lot more to be done. I know this. You know this. But something tells me we have to take the first step. So that's what I'm asking you to do. Would you empower the people in this congregation to take the first step? If I've just described you as a parent, as a leader of an organization, as a member in the church, and you find yourself somehow having become the very thing you didn't want as a child, but you're scared, man, you're scared. You know what? I'm just going to open the altar. I'm just going to allow you to come forward and kneel at your own time, at your own speed. I just think we need to self-identify. I can't just send you home right now. Or if you're one like the man by the pool that wants something so badly that you can't get for yourself, there is no one to help me. And you hear maybe the voice of Jesus this morning saying, do you want to be well? Get up and walk.